to reach the hard-to-reach student. I want to, I guess, just make sure that in the spirit of what Barnaby was talking about this morning, my journey through mindfulness, with mindfulness, is a fairly recent one. Probably about 5 years ago, kind of skipped to the bottom. I was trained by Amy Saltzman online with people from all over the world with Still Quiet Place. And then locally, I was able to work with Patricia Broderick. And I know that there's going to be, Brenda Nelson is going to be here tomorrow, I believe, to discuss learning to breathe more. Both of those resources really helped me to bring mindfulness to the students. And what's really nice is that they complement each other a lot, but they also allow your own creativity and your own freedom to be able to do some of these practices. Right now, and I think the reason that I was kind of picked to do this is that I work at the Alternative High School in Crystal Lake. Crystal Lake is a suburb north of here. If you're not aware, we have 4 high schools in the district, and our program only takes students from those 4 high schools. So we were off campus. We were moved to an on-campus location just this year, which has been a little strange to kind of deal with. But at the same time, it's been great because we've had the opportunity to be able to use the resources of the comprehensive high school where we didn't before. We didn't have a gym. I'm also actually for the first time teaching a unique PE is what we're calling it, and we're trying to get the kids in our program to have more of an experience with outside, although they keep saying, this isn't PE. It's like we're doing as much as we can. So we're trying to kind of incorporate mindfulness and awareness within that venue as well. So, and just to kind of let you know a little bit about our population. So it's kind of evolved, but right now we have only student-centered IEP, and those students have to have ED as either a primary or secondary. And then some of our students, and I think that's maybe a show of hands if you're interested in how to do mindfulness with the autism spectrum disorder. Is that why a lot of people are here? Okay. So, you know, I would say, and I'll kind of move to this more, but when I go to these groups, I have to be mindful when I enter into them for myself. And I have to have an open mind. There's no limitations as far as I'm concerned with these kids. So that's the mindset that I'm using, but I'll get to how you engage them in a little bit here. I'm also a group facilitator in private practice, as well as a college student community where these students haven't been able to kind of make it in college. They need a little bit more structure, and so there's an actual kind of dorm setting in Chicago, right in the Loop, and I'm a part of their programming as well. Okay, so there's lots of definitions of mindfulness. This is just mine, and actually it was really kind of drilled into us by Amy Saltzman. But part of what I always try to teach the students and remember for myself that it's about being in the present moment with an attitude of kindness and curiosity. And the curiosity piece is key. So if you're being non-judgmental, you know, whatever the case may be, but all these students, wherever they're at, have a mind, and they also have a way to be mindful. It might not be our way. It might not be, it's kind of like with teaching in the classroom too. You have to differentiate learning based on their learning styles and their abilities and their accommodations, okay? This is the same way. This is the same mentality that you go into these groups. I would have, he's like 6'3", probably 250 pounds. And he would come into the group every time, He would lay on the floor, put a chair over his head, and he would look like he was asleep. And we would go through our rituals. And every once in a while, I'd check in and say, hey, Max, you with us? Yep. I'm with you. And that was all that I required of him, as far as just to be there, right? And he knew that. He knew that he could just come and be in that space. I have another student who's, some of the students that are on the spectrum disorder can take things very literally. So I say, let's take a deep breath. But for him, that is his centering point. He learned it from being in these groups. He may not get the concepts totally, but for him, it's a centering piece. Okay, so those are just some examples. The other kind of group that I work with are the kids that have a lot of difficulty with emotional management. We all understand, and actually, I think a lot of our teenagers, a lot of our kids these days have difficulty with emotional management. So we're kind of working with the same kind, but I know, like Karen was talking earlier in Trauma Informed, that some of our kids are especially a special hard time, and that if they're not managing their emotions, they might end up in a psychiatric hospital. Okay, so these are the kinds of kids that might go and come back from those settings too, where actually they're using those, mindfulness a lot in those settings. So it's easy for them to kind of flow back in, which is really nice. Because they get some of the concepts, but every time I ask them, I'm like, well, what does mindfulness mean? They don't really know. We have to kind of and some of them have this perception that mindfulness means meditation, and it's not. That's just a practice. We also have a very intelligent population that comes to our building, and they're like, how do I do it? How do I do it right? I can't do it. I can't clear my mind. Those types of things. So you have to do a lot of dispelling of those myths so that they're not necessarily feeling like they're failures in that setting as well. Okay. So I just kind of wanted to go through with you a little bit of my rituals that I do with the students. And by the way, I do think having some sort of ritual or expectation that you start every group with is something that is very settling and also very grounding for them. So this is my singing bowl. And the students are really fascinated with this. And some kids that are saying things like, this is boring, I don't get this, I don't want to do this, they'll grab this bowl and they will play with it. Okay? So what I have them do is, and then when you hear it stop ringing, you raise your hand. Okay? And then I remind them that everyone's hearing is different. And you back here may not hear it as much as up here. So kids are raising their hands at different times. And that's kind of another non-judgmental. I had a kid with half hearing loss, and he would always raise his hand. And that was bringing awareness to him. He's not, he was kind of a screw off here and there, but it's like, no guys, he is deaf in one ear. So he can't hear like you guys can. So, and then the other thing that I do for them too is demonstrate this. How many of you worked with a singing bowl before? Okay, so you know the really cool vibration. And that's what I want the kids to feel too. That it's not just the sound, it is the feeling that you get from this. So we have a lot of kids experimenting with this. The toughest thing is that they give up really easy. They don't know, their frustration tolerance. I'm like, let's try it again. Let's use different techniques. And sometimes they help each other out with that too. Second to that is mindful eating. Food is a big draw. What am I doing for mindful eating? If anybody would like a strawberry to help demonstrate, would anybody like to help demonstrate? Okay. They're huge. So we start by, and I usually, so one of the things I like to try to do is always pick something healthy. In my mind, a lot of our kids are just not going to like to try. So before we eat, I just want you to, does anybody else want to try? Come over there. Before you eat the strawberry, I want you to look at it. What do you see? Notice anything? Sure. Yeah. Well, here I have strawberry. Okay. Anybody want my picture? Okay. Okay. So, now personally, this is coming out of my pocket, and I have to feed 50 students. So it is just a taste, right? And I usually look for things on sale, and that tends to be the things that might be in season. But I talk a lot about, I grew up in the 70s. Strawberries were not available all the time in the grocery store, right? So you tell them those stories about how you're receiving this, how it is coming to you. The other thing about these strawberries is that they're organic. Does anybody notice some imperfections in these? A little bit? So we oftentimes, and myself included, when we're going to the grocery store, making sure that we're picking the right one that's not moldy, that's not, imperfect in some way. But oftentimes, we're finding that the organic, the things that are healthier for us, don't have the usual shapes. And maybe don't even have the usual tastes either. Okay? So, you're looking at it, you're smelling it. What do you smell? Does it smell like a strawberry? Does it smell like a strawberry should? Sometimes I don't smell anything. You might not. Okay, so now we're just going to take one bite, but don't chew. Just allow it to sit in your mouth. Just notice anything that you taste. Maybe a sound from when you bit into it. And now chew. And notice the difference. Notice the difference from when you first tasted it on your tongue, and then when you first bit into it. And now swallow. And now you can finish. Now, some of these kids have a real hard time waiting, right? And once they kind of get used to what mindful eating is, I don't always go through this very long, wait, don't eat it, sort of thing. But I do tell the story behind food, or ask them. And some of them are gardeners, some of them are cooks, and they like to tell their own stories about their food that they have. So you're kind of engaging on that level too. I have Discovery Box that I use for just mindful touch. You can put different things in here. Ask them, closing your eyes, what do they think this is? Come up with some, things that are, okay. We made these stress balls once. So this is just rice and beans and some balloons. And they got to decorate them and put some words on them. So all of these things, it's a mindful activity, right? So they're actually doing something that's taking time, that they're using their hands. But everybody can do it. It's not limited to anybody's ability, or you can help them out. Some of them, and one of the things that I noticed too is kind of like the urgency to do it or get their part. They're always wanting more and more and more. And the way, it's also a lesson in patience, it's a lesson in not being greedy, those many, many, many mindful lessons. I just wanted to show you these. This is a little trick of mine. These are my bowls that I use for food. They're so cheap, and you can put anything, you can put anything in them. Okay, so again, budget friendly. All right, so the last thing that I wanted to show you guys was a really cool, it was a multi-week project. We went outside and we did a mindful walk. You guys are all familiar with mindful walking? Okay. So I wanted them to pick something that they were drawn to in nature, something small. They had to put it in an envelope. This, unfortunately, does not have the example, but a lot of people came back with grasses or like a pine cone or things like that. So what they did was they looked in a book of words and something that, again, was meaningful to them. We did just a little hodgepodge thing, and they were able to take this home and put this on their wall or whatever. And again, being creative, thinking about, I got this from my next door neighbor who's a carpenter, so had all these nice little blocks of wood that I was able to do this project with the kids. So anything that's artistic that they're using with their hands, a lot of mindfulness in the curriculums are very, you're using your words, and there's a lot of exercises, but sometimes they really need something more hands-on. And the last thing that I do, and this is because I work in a high school and they kind of need a break. It's towards the end of the semester, I always give them a mindful movie, and there's lots of really good mindful movies out there. We all know Inside Out, that was a really good one. One that I found was incredibly mindful, and you all have to watch it again, if you've seen it or not, is WALL-E. And WALL-E is one of those movies, especially, like I ended up watching it over and over and over again. That movie has so much foreshadowing as to what's going on in our environment right now. And the kids really get into it for that reason. And they really do enjoy, even the old, or the kind of animation ones. Karate Kid was a really good one. The retro, the old one, the original. That was a really good one to use. And then, has anybody seen or heard of Free Solo? So that's a new documentary that's out. It's by National Geographic. It's by a young man, I'm totally blanking on his name right now, who actually free soloed El Capitan, Alex Honnold, that's his name. And talk about mindfulness. Talk about mindfulness. This is an incredible, and it also kind of documents how the cameramen were able to do all this stuff too, and all the relationship stuff. So sometimes we need a little help in different ways to communicate with the kids. Okay, I think my time, am I up? Yes, I am up. Jane, I will turn it over to you.
So kind of piggybacking off Maria, my name is Jade McGarrah. My educational experiences have been, I'm a school psychologist, and I have also been an autism behavior consultant. School psychology primarily at the elementary and preschool level, kind of early childhood level. And then my consultant work has been pre-K through high school. So kind of piggybacking off this idea of direct service versus indirect service, one thing that really strikes me when I think specifically about the autism population and also students with social emotional disabilities, when I was a consultant, so much of my work was indirect. So social workers kind of on the ground were doing direct service. My role was really indirect in consulting. And what struck me, kind of related to what Barnaby said today, was this idea of building systems. So I would consult on a student, and me and the social worker would work on an idea, but that didn't necessarily transcend to when they were in the general education setting or when they were in PE or music. So my little part of this presentation is kind of helping to build a system. And this would be one system that me and my social worker helped kind of create at our current elementary setting. So right now I'm a school psychologist close by in Geneva, me and my social worker at our elementary school kind of teamed to help create kind of some social emotional initiatives. But I do think it's funny because today it got me thinking, our early morning presentation with Barnaby when he was saying, oh, you could think of mindfulness not just in the social emotional realm, but also in the academic realm, more holistic. That kind of got me thinking about how to think about it later. But I think, as you guys know, when you're trying to kind of first embed mindfulness, if that social emotional lens can be a hook. But it got me thinking. So the first page in our packet is really just our kind of phases of initiation. So our goal was to, me and my social worker wanted to infuse some more potentially meaningful social emotional activities, lessons at the core level. So in our mind, we had our friends on the autism spectrum, some of our friends who were having more significant kind of tier 3 social emotional needs, those who we were thinking of. Me and her were working with them at like a crisis level, at a tier 3 level regularly, and we kind of wanted to build in supports for those friends, but so all friends could benefit. And my goal kind of year 1 was just to have kind of vernacular, building level vocabulary. Really honestly, just so that every friend, all my student friends kind of have heard the word mindful and maybe have a link for what that means. We also did some curriculum related to social thinking. So also to have the vernacular and the vocabulary zones, zone, but you're in blue zone, you're in green zone. I don't know if some of you are familiar with that. And that my teachers know that, but it's not just the social worker and the psychologist know that, and a couple of kids know that. It's that all the teachers have that idea, and then eventually building up and all my students have that idea. So this would just be, actually this front page is something I created, we presented to our principals in November. So this was our phases at our particular elementary school, but trying to make it kind of more district-wide. We kind of went through different phases. So it wasn't just, then one day we were at phase 4, we were creating lessons on social thinking, or, not. Right now all our teachers are kind of on board with the idea of teaching kind of experimenting with social thinking and some of these SEL initiatives, but we went through kind of that phase. So I won't go through that in depth, but I'll highlight a few of those. The first thing would be really the importance of the principal being involved. So I don't, obviously the idea of stakeholder involvement, but in our scenario, in meeting with our principal, one thing that she really valued was that teachers were giving her feedback that we needed more core SEL, that was a need. Our district uses Second Step as their core. I don't know how many are familiar with Second Step. It's kind of a general SEL program. Our teachers could identify that there were gaps in that there were things that all students, but certainly the students I know, that my personal friends, kids with autism or special needs, were missing. And so the principal, in her leadership role, met with all grade level teams, so K through 5, and they identified lessons in Second Step that resonated with their grade levels and lessons that did not resonate with their grade levels. And based upon the lessons that were not resonating, me and the social worker kind of supplanted those lessons or supplemented those lessons with things like zones of regulation, things like size of the problem. We've also used some, I wouldn't say we're teaching mindfulness, but I would say we're experimenting with that introduction using things like the Mind Up curriculum. So with regards to that, we helped create me and the social worker helped create a scope and sequence to kind of piggyback off of the Second Step curriculum. If you kind of turn the page, the other thing I wanted to highlight, and then this would be second and third pages in your packet, would be to help support the teachers, because some teachers were like, yes, I'm in it, I want to supplement this. Some teachers were like, SEL's not my job. You kind of get a variety, right? Everyone, you kind of get a variety with that. So to help support that, we also did 2 things. One, we did help facilitate the teaching of new lessons. We helped kind of create those new lessons with the teachers. We also made a SEL website that our teachers have access to, which has resources. And some of them are, in the back of your thing, it'll be like breathing resources, some breathing visuals that are pretty common, but now the teachers can just access those online, through their Google. So we made a Google website for them to access things like emotion regulation, visuals, social stories, things related to zones of regulation, some extra tools for ACEs or grief, and some extra tools for mindfulness. It's not necessarily an expectation that a teacher would pull that resource and kind of independently use that, but for us it was more helping build a discussion point, that it's not just me and the social worker know about grief. It's like, hey, let's have this dialogue. And also kind of giving them those resources at their hand too, they can experiment with that. The other thing we did to kind of help support our SEL mindfulness mission at our building level was our principal provided us some funding, so we had $500 to build up an SEL library, including mindfulness books. So we worked with our building librarian to help code those so that teachers can check them out, just like you would check out any other book. Right now, they're specific for teachers, not necessarily student checking out. Our goal here was to help embed different SEL pieces, whether that be friendship skills or diversity or some mindfulness breathing pieces into the regular curriculum. So not just, this is the 20 minutes a week that I teach SEL, that I can use these books throughout the year. So for example, 5th grade, I'm kind of embraced this idea of SEL throughout the day, every day, all the time, and did a unit on, it was kind of a mindset growth unit. So they were using books on different strengths. So there were books related to, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's books like how to do homework without throwing up. And kind of some books related to sort of ADHD symptomology or students who might have regulation issues. So they were using those books for everyone, kind of based on our SEL library. So in your packet, I printed out kind of our SEL library, just as a resource for you guys when you're working with teams. This is really just books that have kind of an SEL focus, mindfulness, leadership, bullying, celebrating differences, that you could share with teachers, parents, if anyone's ever looking for like a resource. And then this is just a snapshot of our website, mostly so I could remember to reference it, but the idea of an SEL website as a teacher tool. And then 2 examples, pretty general, generic, kind of breathing tools that a teacher might find kind of embedded on that website. So if a teacher were to go and say like, I could use a tool for breathing, this is maybe something you would find. Okay, thanks.
Hello everybody. My name is Mary McCarter, and I am a school nurse. You probably think, why do you have a school nurse up here? Because I just take care of the physical needs of people. When I first started in school nursing, I'll take a step back. My bachelor degree was in human social services, and I worked as an outreach counselor when I first got out of college. Found it wasn't quite what I wanted to do. I went back to school, I became a nurse. Many years later, I had kids. I went into the schools when my kids started in the schools, and this will be an easy job. It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job. It's a very busy job. I first started in a special ed co-op, working with students that had developmental disabilities, are medically fragile, those syndromes that you hear of but don't think you'll ever see in your lives. A lot of seizure disorders, a lot of students with autism. One of the first things I learned being that school nurse was I really had to meet that student where they were. And by getting to know them and meeting them where they were, I was better able to connect with them. So when I left the co-op, I went to the elementary, and now I have little ones, I have K through 6, and the emotions were really pretty amazing to me, that they were just really out of control emotions sometimes. So I started doing breathing with the kids. I was doing yoga at that time. Somewhere in there I went back, I became a hatha yoga instructor, so I got a little bit into meditation, mindfulness. I started bringing that more in. I moved to the high school. So I'm in a 2,000 student high school. I'm the only nurse, and I find that we have a lot of students that have what are called somatic complaints. So I have a quote that I want to read because I think it just really speaks When was the last time one of your patients, and we could put students here, came to you with the complaint, my life hurts? Few problems are more common in the primary care pediatric setting than somatic illnesses, yet most of them go unrecognized. Symptoms can include headache, recurrent abdominal, limb, muscle, or chest pain, fatigue, or a combination of physical symptoms. Studies suggest that between 10 and 30% of patients coming to their pediatricians have a social, emotional, or psychological component to their physical concerns. That really spoke to me because those are all the things that school nurses see every day. Every day. So I kind of brought Maslow's hierarchy into my mind. I said, okay, so let me check them out physically. I do their physical symptoms, and most of the times I didn't see anything. You know, they'd say their throat was sore, but it was nice and pink. You know, they'd say their ears ached, but their ears looked fine. There was no fever. I started to recognize that maybe there was something else going on with these kids. And so I started going a little bit deeper and asking, what's going on with you? Or they'd be like pacing in my office. They couldn't sit down in my office and tell me what was going on. So I started taking breaths with them. Okay, let's just take a deep breath. You know, and then I started doing grounding activities, just putting their feet on the ground, balancing their bottom, letting those shoulders come down, doing some breathing. And it kind of led into, now we're doing relaxation exercises in my office, and the kids are going back to class. They don't need to go home. So to me, mindfulness, including that in my practice, I think it's really helped my students a lot. So still at the regular high school, I had a huge office because I had lots of kids, and I made a quiet corner where I kept the lighting off. There was a cot back there. I had a little lighted waterfall, and students would come in and say, Mrs. McCarter, can I just go sit over there for a minute? And that's all they needed. They would go and they would sit and they would center and they would ground or whatever they needed to do, and they'd go back to class. I feel my attendance rate dropped, increased. They didn't go home. They were going back to class, and I really felt that that was success. So then we developed a school of specialized schools, which is where I work right now. So all of the kids that are not successful in our home school go to our school of specialized schools. So we have our newcomer students, our students that have no English, so they're not able to integrate into the home school. We have our medically fragile students. Again, this is kind of like that special ed group, but now we've brought them home into the district instead of sending them to a co-op. I have a school of personalized learning where students that have not been successful but don't have an IEP, but in my mind they all should have IEPs. They have anxiety and they have school refusal, but it's personalized learning. So they come to school and they're pretty much online learning all day long, but they still have a lot of emotional needs and the ACEs and the traumas that they encounter. They all have those and have way higher needs. So I still see a lot of them in my office. The program that I work with the most is our therapeutic day school, and these are our kids that have emotional and behavioral disorders. Breathing with these are all kids that want to go home. They don't want to be in school. They don't want to learn. I've heard the S-bomb more in my last couple of years than I ever thought I would in a school setting, and I've learned not to take it personally. So I think that's being mindful. So when it comes to like why is a nurse talking about mindfulness, we all need to be mindful. And so when I started to practice this within my schools, one of my staff members came to me and said, Mary, I would really like to do some of this stuff with my students, but I don't know how to do that. So we're very blessed in my district that we have what we call internal university, and it's run through Quincy College, and I was able to write a proposal and run a mindfulness course for my staff. And so one of the first things I recognized when I did that is they didn't know how to be mindful. They didn't know how to take care of themselves. And that's why I think we see so much stress and so much burnout and people leaving the profession is because they're not taking care of themselves. So my first day I went in and did this 3-minute sit and breathe exercise and let's check in with your breath. And I was looking around and wonderful, but they were not sitting still. They really had a hard time just sitting and being with their breath for 3 minutes. So I kind of threw my plans out the window, and it meant 3 hours a day. So think about 3 hours after somebody's taught all day long to keep their attention. It was an interesting course, and I got a lot out of it. But we had 3 hours once a week for 7 weeks, and I asked them to keep a 10-minute-a-day mindfulness journal of what they were doing to help themselves. I knew right away I couldn't get these students to sit and be mindful, so I had to think of other ways. And one of the things we did is we took our phones and we researched mindfulness apps. And everybody picked an app because everybody uses their phone. Everybody's got their phone, right? So we looked at mindfulness apps, and we shared out what the apps were, and everybody picked an app. And that was their first week's activity, 10 minutes a day. And if you can't do 10 minutes a day, say, Mary, you know what, I can't do 10 minutes a day, but this is what I tried to do. And so we worked from that over our 7-week course, and we did things like we took a field trip to a labyrinth, and we walked labyrinths. We did mindful eating. We did a lot of yoga. We did yoga nidra, which if you've never done yoga nidra before, my favorite thing ever. Everybody should do yoga nidra in their life. So we had a lot of different experiences, but our final report was everybody had to put together some type of an activity that they could teach their staff or that they could teach in their classroom. And we developed a mindfulness toolkit. So everybody that was in the class has access to this toolkit so they can bring these things out to their staff at their home buildings. So mindfulness 1 led to mindfulness 2, so we're delving a little bit deeper. But I think I'm probably out of time also, and if you guys Rhea? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I think it's time for questions if anybody has them. So the question was, how did the teachers do with Nidra? And for those of you that don't know what yoga Nidra is, it's yoga sleep. And when the first time I did one, the instructor said to me, if you fall asleep, it's okay. I'm like, score, you know. Because I'm one of those people, if I finally relax and I get to sleep, that's like a good thing. But yoga nidra is very hard for somebody who has a hard time sitting still. And so, if they don't do shavasana well, they don't do yoga nidra well. But I always tell, when I'm teaching yoga nidra, I always tell them, if you fall asleep, your body needs that more than you need to listen to me doing a relaxation activity with you. I think by the end of the second session, people were much more open to it. In fact, on our day of finals, there was an activity that was offered. I knew we might have a little extra time. It's like, you can leave, or if you want, we'll do yoga nidra again, and everybody stayed for yoga nidra. So I think it was successful after that.
When you have students, so for any of you, when you have students with like behavioral disorders or like really struggle with emotion regulation, what do you do to get them started with mindfulness? Like what strategies have you found to get them to like buy into it?
Well, if they present to the nurse office, we start with breathing and grounding.
I honestly feel like the food is a big draw, you know, and you gotta give them something to, and I know that we're talking about emotional regulation, but at the same time, so the food kind of gets them through the door, it gets them settled, the mindful listening, whenever I'm like, you guys ready? They all are quiet. So those rituals really kind of just help them know this is what we're doing, this is where we're at. I start off always with mindfulness with a lot of the brain research. I work with teens, so they're more curious about that sort of thing. They have the big why question out there, why do we have to do this? So I give them a lot of that information. I try to normalize it with people that they know practice mindfulness on a regular. Sports teams usually are big. You know, here in Chicago, the Chicago Bulls used it before it was even a cool thing to do. There's some really cool videos out there that you can kind of demonstrate the practice, and they can kind of get into it. Does anybody ever heard of, a really cool, it's a kind of a teen cartoon animation, and there's a really cool song that they do, and it's about letting your emotions not be so big. So if you look up Steven Universe, and I can't remember the name of it. So there's all these things that and that's why I put my email up there, that there's all these things that I discovered to try to, I work with the same kids year after year after year, semester after semester after semester. So I am changing things up all the time to keep them interested. So you can definitely call me and I'll send you links of things that, call me, or actually probably better to email, because I check that all the time. It's just a thought, that's the name of it. Here's just a thought, that's what it's called. And it's really cool because it actually, the younger kids will too, what happens is that it kind of morphs. It starts off with this butterfly and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's what happens to kids when their thoughts get so big that they're difficult. And then along with the song, say it's just a thought, and it becomes smaller and more manageable. So those are some things. Any other questions? And I know Jane had some handouts. She said that for those that didn't get them, there are some in the back. Okay, there's some in the back. If you didn't get a handout, I know that she was going to, if you want to give her your email, she was going to pass those along to you. So thanks everybody for your attention, and good luck on your journeys.
Does anybody have anything that they do in their school they want to share? We finished a little early so we could